and welcome to another episode of the TRC podcast. This is episode 11. This is me, your host, Jake. Along with me are Ryan and a friend of ours that is guest starring, Jimmy Fan 48. He is a friend of Ryan's. We'll hear more from him and more about him in a little bit. But first, I want to say, I keep saying sorry for all this stuff. I truly am, but we weren't able to have an episode last week because, long story short, everything that could go wrong did go wrong, and after like 2 days of fighting over it, we just decided to call it a week and just redo it this time. So thank you for bearing with us. We had a fairly interesting race yesterday in the Cup Series. There was a lot of action throughout the field, not necessarily at the front, but it was definitely entertaining in a kind of bizarre way. So I'll pass the floor off to you guys. What do you have to say about
server? We actually know each other personally, have for a long time. We used to race go-karts together as kids and stayed in touch, and it's been in this community for a couple of years, and just, we've been kind of looking for any guests we can get with all these different people having other plans and everything. So he wanted to jump on board this week, and we're glad to have him here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. It should be a fun episode.
Yep. So I guess the biggest thing yesterday was just turn one feels like something's got to give because we had like every single restart this like, I don't know, it complete chaos. And what ended up happening at the end was, after that caution that Christopher Bell brought out, it was like next two restarts, nobody could get through there without wrecking. And then we all know what happened at the very end with Ross deciding he was going to take the Mario Kart way, the shortcut. We ended up with a finishing order that was like, may as well have been a restrictor plate race. So, yes, the good thing is Tyler Reddick was the best car all day and ended up winning. Definitely glad that whatever bullshit Ross was trying to pull off there didn't end up somehow working out for him. And overall, I thought it was a good race. I just think we need to do something about that first turn, reconfigure the track or just do something, We can't have that happen on every single restart this place.
Yeah, I agree. Actually looking at, I've been to this track a couple times. There is a sort of an alternate entry turn, I guess turn one, just kind of right past it, good before turn four. I think it's a little tighter, but, I think the overall characteristics of it would be a lot. They would alleviate a lot of the pressure. You would have to, if you were going to be doing those moves they made in that first turn, you'd have to be going through the grass basically the whole way down. So, that's a possibility. I don't know who else used that. I know IndyCar has not used that. And it's there. I just don't know if the safety hazard or if NASCAR just does not want to use that particular turn.
Yeah, does IndyCar use the exact same layout?
They do, yes.
Somehow it works for them, I guess. Just less cars or more space, I guess. But yeah, I thought, Joey Logano, for starters, just driving in there like it was NASCAR Thunder and using four guys as just basically a wall to keep himself straight, and that was just ridiculous. And then Ross after that, it's like, combined with what happened last year too with Briscoe getting shoved off track, and then that whole clusterfuck. It's
Logano move was.
It was like I said it at the time. It was straight out of something you would do like at Martinsville and NASCAR Thunder. You just drive straight into somebody and use them as a wall, and then drive on past it. It's like, yeah, I think in general the finishing order was very misrepresentative in a lot of ways.
That's a winner.
Harrison Burton finishing third or whatever. Bubba, I
he was
like
top
Bubba,
10.
but Todd Gilliland had a really nice run. Although
I think Bubba was top 10 speed, I feel like. But, yeah, I mean, fifth place, I don't know if he was that fast, but he was
Harrison Burton was really the only really kind of egregious one.
But Todd Gilliland was solid all day.
It's kind of leading me into what I was going to bring up, which I guess kind of has been a recurring theme of our whole, and I was just dealing all day today, I posted something on the Twitter account just about how results this year, so much more often than in a lot of other years, it seems like they really just don't match a lot of performance, and somehow the Peanut Gallery found that tweet, and particularly the Michael Mickey Dowell fans got offended at it, and did what Peanut Gallery people on Twitter tend to do. I try not to let it get to me, but unfortunately, when you're trying to build yourself up into having this type of platform, you got to take the good with the bad, and thankfully only had two people who got really after it that I had to end up blocking because they just wouldn't shut the hell up. But it's like when I spend multiple hours every day compiling these statistics that really rate performance, and with these advanced metrics, and people try to argue with me that they know more about this than I do just from looking at the results and looking at the box score or whatever. It's just, I really try not to act like one of those condescending sort of holier than thou types who looks down on people for not being very smart, but it's just, it's tiresome. I guess that's just what social media is. It just rewards the lowest common denominator, and I try not to feed into it too much, but
I've encountered
the moral
that.
of the story is just you can't take results at face value, and the fact that William Byron, probably the biggest example of this yesterday, had another top 5 run going all day, then gets wrecked on a restart, finishes, crash clock screwed him over again, just like in Atlanta, ends up finishing 30th or something, and suddenly, means he didn't have a good race. That is just ridiculous. If you're going to tell me Harrison Burton yesterday had a better race than William Byron, I'm sorry, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, top 10s nowadays, they just seem like they can be, anybody can get them if there's a big wreck or some sort of lucky strategy game that plays into your favor. Let me just look at the stats. McDowell has 9 top 10s, while Byron has 5. McDowell's on 38 laps all season, and Byron's at 611.
And McDowell has become the ultimate poster boy, I think, for fans who think that Front Row is still some sort of terrible team, even though we saw 2 years ago when John Hunter Nemechek was there, he was having those exact same types of runs as McDowell, except he was a rookie and he was crash prone, and he hasn't exactly lit the world on fire in the Truck Series this year. So, and B, you've just got these people who think any sort of backdoor top 10 run is somehow better than running top 5 all day and getting crashed. So, once again, always fun to have to deal with that. But hopefully, I think if anything good can be said about all that, it's that it is getting more visibility for these types of statistics, and that's really what I'm just trying to do with all this, is because NASCAR does not have really very analytical audience. There's like very, very small pockets of people, NASCAR fans who, are analytically literate, I guess I should say, but it's not a whole lot of people, and I'm just really trying to kind of spread my my findings and hope that they're interesting for some people. But like I said, you gotta take the good with the bad, and you gotta sometimes deal with the people who don't want to listen to you and who are just so convinced that they know more than you, even though they don't do a single lick of the research that I do about this stuff. And,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, I've dealt with that. When I've been like on social media, like it was more in an F1 context, but you try to explain this stuff to people, and they just don't understand. It's like a religious belief that they have almost.
It is. I mean, that's why you were the one who really coined the whole results fundamentalism thing. I mean, it basically is a religion for these people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one thing I'll say it's always kind of been ridiculous, but I could see a little bit more of a justification for like pumping up the top 10s of the average finish or whatever back when we had 43 competitive cars in the 2000s. But now that we barely even have 30 competitive cars and probably not even that many competitive drivers that are really cup level talents, it's just absurd. And like average finish, I don't remember if we've talked about this or not exactly, but I was mentioning it earlier on in the chat that basically what average finish is predicated on is just avoiding a few really bad finishes while piling up a lot of good runs along with some mediocre ones. But really all it takes is just a couple of bad things to happen to you, or DNFs, or like if you go out early in a race or whatever, to tank it. And that automatically takes you out of the running for the best average finish. And we've talked ad nauseum about why top 10s are not really that good of a measuring stick.
I mean, I think average finish does have some meaning to it because it does, weigh every single position in the field. But obviously, it also, though, treats the difference between first and second as the same as the difference between 35th and 36th, which is ridiculous. But I do think it's more meaningful than top 10s because 10 is just such an arbitrary number. They use it because it's a round number. It's easy to just put it there and say that's, I guess, their guideline of what constitutes a good finish. But it could easily just as well be top 11s or top 12s. And what's really the difference between finishing 10th and 11th? Is it that much more important than the difference between finishing 9th and 10th or 11th and 12th? It's just an arbitrary number that. I look at average running position, I look at pass differential, and I combine all that stuff, and that's where ETDR comes from. And that to me, every single time I'm going to, even if it's not always the most accurate on a race-by-race basis, it's just so much more meaningful than, but top 10s, though. And what I especially love is, when I try to present this type of argument, finishes aren't everything. Top 10s, average finish, throw it all out the window. And yet the people who I'm trying to get this across to every single time, what they come back with is just, but finishes though. It's like no matter how many times you just say, finishes aren't everything. Finishes, I actually just put this in my bio on that account. Results are random, performance is predictive, and it's like no matter how many times you try to say it, it's like people just miss the point. They go on about, but average finish, or, whatever, and it's like it's just not even worth it.
Yeah, and like
Absolutely.
I was saying just before, Again, the top tens thing. Like, again, 20 years ago, like, a top 10 run would mean pretty much that you're in the top 20% of the field of the competitive cars. But now, if you look at it, like, we've probably got 25, I would say, competent drivers in cup level rides that aren't just completely off the pace. And so, really, that only puts you in about the top, I guess, 40% now. That's almost, you could say, barely better than average. And so it's even more ridiculous, and it was already ridiculous not that long ago. So, yeah.
But really is the worst of it, I think, is when people, for like Xfinity and trucks, when you hear that, it's like, just a couple weeks ago, I have been, as annoying as the McDowell hype is this year, I think there's one Xfinity driver who I think is even worse when it comes to that regard, and that's Riley Herbst, because he is driving, you can't even make the underfunded equipment argument about him. He's driving a car that Chase Briscoe 2 years ago dominated in.
9 wins.
Should have won
9 the championship.
Wins. Pretty clearly the either 1A or 1B best driver all year with Cindric. And Herbst is just flat out underachieving in it. Has never been good. He is having statistically best season of his career this year, and it's barely above average. It's in that 115 something range in ETDR, which is like the whole range between 100 to 125 is just slightly above average. 125 is what I consider quote unquote good, and okay, it's 119, so slightly better than that, but still. Every week I hear, oh, Riley Herbst is having this great season, and I'll even see certain influential people on Twitter say, Riley Herbst, if he were in the 41 right now, he'd be better than Cole Custer, who, I'm sorry, are we forgetting about what Cole Custer did in that exact same Xfinity equipment in 2019? It's like, so I have some person on Twitter, respond to me and say, Herbst has all these top 10s this year. Like, so? Out of how many competitive Xfinity cars in the field? There's like 15.
At the most point. At the very
every
most.
Single week, that car.
I mean, he's led 5 laps all year. So far this season, 41
Four of them,
Briscoe.
4 of them were in that one Pocono race where he just stayed out, I think, and fell all the way back to 15th by the end of it.
And then 2020, I mean, Briscoe led over 1,000 laps, I guess, in that car.
Is the type of driver, I think I'm going to call it the Eric Jones theory, I guess. Or Eric Jones is the example of it in one direction, and the other direction would be like Riley Herbst or Michael McDowell. It's a driver who is not very good, but somehow gets to stick around and gets all these opportunities to eventually become, at least average. And people hype them up because of that, because the bar is set so low for them, or for whatever reason, finishing better than their performances are. Opposite end of the spectrum, Eric Jones, Cole Custer, you name them, these guys who run really well in the lower series, they get up the cup, they struggle for whatever reason, people are just lining up to shit all over them their first couple of seasons. Daniel Suarez, another example of that. And somehow this whole recency bias, creates this complete illusion that, if you replaced Cole Custer with Riley Herbst, he would somehow be better. Or if you replaced, a couple of years ago, it was people unironically wanted Eric Jones replaced with Brandon Jones in the Gibbs 20 car, or with the 95 whenever it was still there. It's like, you cannot be so illusioned by these results in a lower series. You cannot honestly think that those drivers would be better than drivers who ran better than them in that series, in a higher series. I also see all this talk about, is AJ Allmendinger the greatest road course racer of all time? Like,
He's won 2 Cup races, one of which was a complete shit show. I mean, AJ is definitely a very good road course driver, but you cannot honestly put him in that conversation just based off of Xfinity. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the current pool of Xfinity drivers, even compared to 5 to 6 years ago, and this year especially was really weak, and there's not a lot of guys that I see being contenders, like legitimate contenders. Maybe a few guys there that will, maybe have a couple good You Make the Chase a couple of years, win a couple of races, but no guys that I see being legitimate Cup Series championship contenders.
Ty Gibbs is probably the only one.
Ty Gibbs is the only one, and he's, 18?
Yeah.
I mean, Braxton make Cup.
Braxton is another classic case of the Herbst effect. A guy who's been in Xfinity for 4 years now, and he's finally driving like a top 2 or 3 driver in that series. It's not. If you put him in the Colleague or the 42 Cup car, I guarantee you he's probably going to run 25th at best. If he's there full time, that's pretty much what he's been doing in his starts this year. He's not better than, I don't know, Eric Jones or someone, or I guess people have been noticing Jones this year now has been much better, but I think also part of it is people still feel so spoiled by the early 2000s rookies who just right away were winning, were running up front. You had Jimmy Johnson, Ryan Newman, Casey Kane, Kyle Busch, Jamie McMurray, Denny Hamlin. All of them were winning in their first seasons or competing for championships. Yeah, Sean, who we had on a couple of weeks ago, just dropped a comment in the chat to say those guys were also much, much older than today's Cup rookies usually are. I guess with the exception of Chase Briscoe and maybe 1 or 2 others. But it's like people expect rookies in Cup today to just automatically be doing that in their first season or 2, when a lot of times it takes time. It took time for Eric Jones. It took time for Suarez, and Cole Custer is the guy I keep harping on now at this point, who I think is eventually going to become a solid driver. If because you don't do what he did in his rookie year, win a race the way he won, even if he wasn't the best driver all day, and have that string of really nice runs whole summer and fall. You don't do that if you're not a talented driver. It's not like he just forgot how to drive. Stewart Haas has been much worse the last 2 years. I think he probably needs some sort of crew chief change or something just to get him going, but there's no reason to believe he can't be doing, 2 or 3 years from now what Eric Jones is doing right now.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, he's one of those guys I could see being like a change of scenery. Get big time improvement for him. You look at Suarez this year I guess in the second year, but even last year, you kind of saw it. Chastain at Trackhouse this year. Eric Jones now at 43. And you got these guys that make these moves, and you kind of just overlook them, but then they turn out to be these solid moves that all of a sudden they're top 15 drivers, and they're kind of on the picture of making the chase.
Nobody is saying that like any of these guys are probably ever going to be championship contending drivers. I don't think. I guess it's possible that someone like Eric Jones or Daniel Suarez could eventually have a type of season. I don't think anybody would have said Martin Truex for his first 10 years or so is ever going to be a championship level driver, but he gets in the right situation, and eventually, he has a string of 4 or 5 elite seasons in a row. But just being an Eric Jones or Daniel Suarez level driver is also not a bad thing at all. Type of guy who can have a winning contending race at least once or twice a year. But yeah, just seems like sports in general are just getting so much younger now than they used to be, and there's this whole idea that athletes are damaged goods if they've not performed up to expectations with whatever their first opportunity is. And I feel like social media has a lot to do with that too. People just want to be so hard on guys and pile on them if they're not performing up to stuff at this exact moment. It's like nobody gets a chance to just build themselves up slowly, but just gaining experience. And
I mean, you look at just sports in general, including NASCAR now, and obviously look at the NBA, NFL, and you expect if you're a top prospect, you'll go into the league as a rookie and be an immediate impact player. As a quarterback, as a point guard, anywhere like Luka or
so many. Like a lot of those guys are really good right away, but then a lot of others, like I guess in the NFL, the old-time example was like Peyton Manning was terrible his first 2 or 3 seasons, and eventually becomes one of the greatest of all time. Josh Allen is probably a good example of that now, but he's a very rare exception of a guy who really struggles at first and eventually actually gets the chance to get better. I look at there are certain coaches or certain athletes, you hear so many examples of guys way back in the past who would have 2, 3, more than that, just awful seasons to start out. Eventually would win championships. And
I think a guy is also like, you look at, I'm thinking the NBA draft a couple years ago. I think it was Brandon Ingram and Jaylen Brown behind Ben Simmons, and everyone pegged Simmons as this next LeBron James. Said, "Oh, those guys, their first year they kind of struggled a little bit." And everyone was like, "Oh, they're us," and they're not going to last long. And now look where those 3 are now. So Simmons is basically out of the league, and Jaylen Brown and Brandon Ingram are arguably the best or one of the best players on their team, and are immediate impact guys. And it's just some people don't come into the league immediately and become a star. Not everyone's LeBron who can come in and got 25 a game in their rookie year and just walk off like nothing happens. I look at baseball as like kind of the only, at this point, one of the only outliers of that, because even if you're drafted first in that MLB draft, you'll in the minors for a few years playing down there. You aren't going to go straight to hockey too.
Baseball and hockey are much different in that prospects will usually not play right away, but
NASCAR was a lot like that. I think up until recently, where guys were supposed to come in as a rookie.
I think though, just with this whole driver development, and it's really been broken ever since, in my opinion, ever since the mid-2000s with the Xfinity, then it was the Busch Series. It was completely just oversaturated with Cup drivers every single weekend, and it just completely destroyed the way NASCAR prospects would be developed, because after that, the only ones who ever got their chances, the ones who were signed from the time they were in diapers by these big teams and who came with all these either sponsors or money, Joey Logano kind of being the first real example of this new age of prospects who, his father is loaded. That got him a Gibbs development deal from, the time he was in the womb.
That's another guy you kind of look at. That changed scenery, and it helped him. Like when he went from Gibbs, he was not good. He just found a good
flipped on him.
But to Penske, and all of a sudden he was within year one a contender on a regular basis.
Your favorite driver,
yes,
Keselowski.
He was at Penske in 2010.
Yeah, he was terrible in 2010, and it's like a light switch goes off.
But you look at these guys, and I think I was thinking of something. Joey Logano for me was at first. When I first started watching late 2007, early 2008. He was that first guy I could literally see from the start and hear how was young, but I knew like, everyone was saying this guy's like gonna be the next Dale Senior or something. He was gonna be like the next greatest thing since sliced bread.
Sliced bread, yeah. Mark Martin did that, right?
And then that nationwide series that year, 2008 when he actually race. Yeah, he was solid. And 2009 he won the Cup, and he was not. I mean, he had the win. He had the fluke win in the rain at Loudon. Other than that, he was invisible. 2010 he was decent. 2010 he was a borderline chase guy. That's probably his best year. That was definitely his best year at Gibbs.
There was a very real conversation in 2012 about whether or not he was even a Cup level driver, and whether or not Penske should just stick with Sam Hornish. And I was on that train at the time. I thought Hornish was much better in 2012 than he was in his previous when he was in the 77. And I'm like, Joey Logano at this point he is who he is, and I was wrong. I'll admit to that, even though I'm not the biggest Logano fan. He proves it with things like what he did yesterday.
Move.
It's like, guys just need time to develop. And just look at how many drivers do we just see get screwed over because they don't get these, development deals from being that when they're that young. They just have to spend their time in the lower series with worse off teams. Very best case scenario, they end up like Ross Chastain. Worst case, though, they end up like Brandon Brown, who will now be known forever as a political meme and not as a driver who was much better than the equipment he got. It's just really not fair the whole way that NASCAR's developmental ladder works. And unfortunately, with how much influence these corporate sponsors all have, I just don't see it really changing anytime soon.
Yeah. I mean, you can see how these guys, Paul Menard's an example, if you have a name and a sponsor that's not going to, Brian Scott, for example, those are two guys you think of that lasted, Brian Scott had no business being in Cup to begin with, period. But, of course he had Shore Lodge or whatever, and he was in Cup for, I guess, he had a full season. I guess he was in there 2015, but it was at Childress.
2016, I think.
Yeah. Or he was the 44, yes.
I actually thought he was a solid Xfinity driver, I guess, for the amount of shit that he took.
Yeah, he started off.
That Cup season was disaster.
But then you have Menard, who, he's a guy that didn't wreck a lot of cars, but he was always a contender. He was
the most irrelevant driver in the Cup Series for pretty much the entire time he was there.
Yeah, and he didn't wreck a lot of cars. It was good for a developing team, but he didn't always give you really good results. So it depends on what you want. He's one of those examples. Brendan Gaughan, I guess, to a degree, but he never got the deals that some of those guys got, especially in Cup. Even in Nationwide, and Xfinity for that matter. He's proven that he could actually contend. It's sponsors are the driving force, and if you have a sponsor that's going to back you, you'll be a Cup driver.
Yeah, we've actually both of us raced go-karts with a guy. I think I mentioned this before, who was in the car series last year, but I guess sponsorship just ended up falling through, and he's back this year just doing late models. And I don't know, in an alternate universe, maybe he'd be in a truck or an Xfinity car right now. So
yeah, and to touch on what you guys have been talking about, just to touch on what you guys have been saying, a lot of this stemmed from the bushwhacking that we mentioned, which, technically it started, I guess, as early as the 90s, but it didn't really just get to an insane level until the mid-2000s. But by 2005, 2006, we had several high-ranking Cup drivers racing full schedules in the Busch Series, Nationwide Series, whatever you want to call it, and actually winning the championships. It was just a next level of absurd. These guys had absolutely no chance, whether it was in the races themselves or getting the rides. And what was even worse was the fact that they were getting them in Cup rides, like the Cup teams infiltrating the Xfinity Series, but having the Cup drivers in them. Which, in the Truck Series, it's always been kind of annoying when the Cup guys have infiltrated there too. But I can at least tolerate it, on a bigger level because, they're at least having to run their own stuff. They're not driving, AAA equipment out of Cup powerhouse shops. But, these guys, you have Kyle Busch running a fully funded, primo Joe Gibbs ride, and leading over 2,500 laps in 2009, in rate when you have races that are barely half the length of Cup events, and it's just not a fair fight. And that's the biggest reason why the talent pipeline just froze up. Like 2007 when we got, I think, Montoya and a couple of other guys. Yeah, that was the end. Yeah, that was
whole open wheel of 07 and 08. All those open wheel guys coming over. That was basically because there were literally no prospects in Xfinity that anybody wanted to have as Cup rookies. It was like Jason Leffler, Paul Menard, J.J. Yaley.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is, that was pretty much the end of it, all the way up until basically we got to a point where finally, enough of the older drivers aged out, and just by default, we had to get some new young guys in. I mean, that's pretty much what it took. And, it's good that they took an okay first step, like in 2011, when they decided that, well, you have to choose what series you want to run for points in, but that only had, a small effect on it. And finally, a few years ago, they had the sense to make the decision and just allowing Cup guys to run 5 races a season, which is the current rule. And so for the most part, you don't really get like the Cup guys ruining the races or hogging up all the rides anymore. So, that's great, but it was way too little too late. A whole generation of drivers had to suffer for it and are still suffering for it to this day. And, there's an equal amount of blame to go around with, NASCAR wanting, being greedy and wanting to receive all this this funding and attention for the Nationwide Series instead of treating it as a true developmental series like other leagues do. And the drivers themselves, wanting to inflate their egos by, beating up on lesser drivers and lesser equipment, and the teams taking advantage of it. Which, as I said, trucks is one thing. Like when Kyle Busch was like running his own equipment, but again, when you have these guys running full seasons in the best equipment you can, there's nothing you can do. And so they made the change they needed to, but it was way too late. And so that's really
definitely look at that. Definitely look at that late 2000s, early 2010s as definitely like the lost generation of NASCAR prospects. Like who the hell knows if, I don't know, just drawing a name out of the hat here, Stephen Light maybe would have been, a top 15 or 20 Cup driver if that whole series wasn't completely oversaturated. Guess the next thing, since we didn't get to cover it last week, was I guess we were going to talk about Pocono ever so briefly, and the history we had with the disqualifications. I just have to say, I mean, even after having a whole week now to think about it, and being a Chase Elliott fan and a Denny Hamlin hater, it's like it's satisfying, obviously, but it's like I don't really feel much. It's like I think Chase himself kind of said it best. It's like this isn't really
winning. It's just the other guy losing. And
Yeah.
I'll take it. I kind of partially wish that Chase didn't have to be the first guy to benefit from something like that because, again, people always jump at any excuse to act like Chase gets everything handed to him. But, I don't know. I'm definitely in favor of taking wins away from guys. It just, if they cheat, I've always been, I've always thought that Jimmy Spencer's 2 wins in 1994 were beyond suspect. I think that's kind of an open secret that NASCAR was keeping that quiet so that McDonald's didn't leave the sport. I've always said wins like that shouldn't count. I don't know what you do. I guess the alternative is like what the NCAA does, just vacate them and don't give them to anybody. But I guess this is probably the best solution. In that case, it just doesn't feel the same.
Yeah, it's one of those things that look back on the race and you just, I don't know, when it comes up to give a winner, you aren't going to really think of anybody. It's kind of be like, somebody wrecked or something happened, but who actually won the race is kind of a weird mystery. It's almost like no one really won, sort of like 2013 tournament. Madness. It was like nobody really won that because, they were taken away from him. I feel that about this, every other disqualification we have, which I'm sure there'll be more. This is definitely not the last disqualification we'll see in the Cup Series. It'll happen again.
I do hope it sends a message that, NASCAR ain't fucking around with this. They are actually going to take wins away from drivers in the Cup Series.
And then with McDowell and the R&D.
Yeah.
It happened with Bradder in season 2, but
speaking of our earlier talking point,
McDowell getting penalized. Definitely sending that message because I guess people didn't hear it clear enough after the whole Brad incident and listen to all those points. DQ2 drivers and then also DQ McDowell or a 100-point penalty and knock him down at least 5 of the points. It's definitely the message has been sent now, and I think people are aware of that now.
Yeah, I'm definitely glad that for as annoying as all these McDowell troll top 10s have been and people who take them seriously like that, I'm definitely glad that I don't have to deal with him finishing 19th or 20th in points after all that, assuming the appeal doesn't go through.
And it won't. But, just one of those guys that...
I guess not a whole lot needs to be said about the Hamlin-Chastain stuff other than that Denny, Jake said it best a couple weeks ago, is the NASCAR version of Christian Bale and American Psycho. And this is probably not over, so we will just revisit that whenever it happens again between those two. And with the way Ross drives, it's definitely probably not over.
With Hamlin, but with other guys too. I wouldn't be surprised if he does that to Kyle Busch.
In the Xfinity race just this past weekend, I think did he take out Creed? I actually wasn't able to watch that race, but I heard he did some stupid shit because it's. Yeah,
he's gonna.
I think I definitely sympathize with Jake a lot, and that Ross is a guy I would like to root for him, and I respect where he came from, and respect that he's one of the most talented drivers probably in the field right now on a raw talent level. But it's like, dude, just you gotta learn how to just not run into people all the time.
We raced with Ryan and I raced with a couple guys that would do that, and there was a reason nobody liked them because they couldn't pass you or even attempt to pass you. At least the track was kind of hard to pass, but without moving you out of the way, basically knocking you out of the groove and forcing their way around you. There was no way you could cleanly. There was no way they could cleanly pass. That's what I feel like when I think of Chastain nowadays. He's one of the most just in terms of talent drivers in the field, but he's also in terms of IQ on the track, he's right near the bottom. He just makes all these moves, and he knows they're never going to work, and they're not going to gain him anything. He does it anyways, and then he has after a race like Atlanta, he has 4 or 5 different guys are pissed at him, are calling for his head. Almirola, Dillon, Truex, Hamlin, obviously. There's literally at least 5 different drivers in this world.
Yeah,
and it's only going to grow before the end of the year.
It does have to obviously be emphasized just how talented he is. And he's too talented to be doing this type of thing. If he can even just kind of harness that just a little bit, like we've seen so many guys before him who would drive like that. Kyle Busch, Tony Stewart, Dale Earnhardt would make a lot of enemies by driving in over their heads or even intentionally sometimes wrecking them. He could be a multiple-time champion at some point if he just learns how to use his head. And
for my
kind of something we were all having a nice conversation a couple of weeks ago, because I guess I was ranking my personal greatest drivers of all time, but I did kind of a bit further than most people probably would in terms of rating just raw talents better than maybe guys who I felt like were just more polished, but also didn't really have the best. They just didn't have that sort of wow factor, I guess. I've always maintained I think Tony Stewart might be the single most talented driver I've ever seen, but you only saw it, only saw him put it all together on a very few occasions and just be as dominant as he was capable of being.
Yeah, I think a Chastain season this year, 2022, he has 2 wins, but if you just look at his numbers in every race, he's been up there. He could easily have, I think, 4 wins at least. And I think a lot of that is just due to his own progression, and, sort of to a degree self-inflicted things where he is aggressive, takes somebody out, or gets into somebody, and then they're pissed at him, and later on they pay it back, or somehow it comes back to bite him later. And I think he could. Pocono obviously example. Even last week, even yesterday, I should say, he had the whole fiasco in that turn. He had a chance of winning that. It's just there's so many races that he's been close, but sometimes it's just his own self-inflicted bad racing decision that ultimately costs him.
Kind of look at. I'll just get this real quick because I know Jake wanted to say something, but that's really, to me, the difference between him and Chase this year is Chase has been. Chase is very talented, but he's also very good at, making the most out of that talent. In a lot of ways, I kind of maybe look at him as sort of like the closest thing to a modern-day Jimmy Johnson or a Jeff Gordon, who, I put Jimmy over both of them all time easily because this era was more competitive, but Chase is just kind of that new driver, that new Hendrick driver who just has both the talent and the finesse to just not make a whole lot of mistakes on his own. I'll just let Jake say whatever he wants to say now, though.
Yeah. From my perspective, like on Ross, again, he's not my favorite driver, but he's one of my favorite drivers, and I've kind of had to lean on him recently because my other guys have been, either sucking or just nothing's been going right for them. I cannot defend a lot of the things he does. Like you mentioned, what happened when the Xfinity race is that he got a bit impatient and he tried to make a pass after I think he was being held up by Creed for about a lap, and he tried to go down the inside and Creed kind of pinched him and he got on the curb and got into him, and I felt bad about that because Creed is in the hunt for the final chase spot in the Xfinity series, and that there's just, even though I know it wasn't intentional, it was bad, and I felt bad about that. I thought it was way worse than what he did yesterday. I think what he did yesterday was bad, but was dumb. But I don't really think it it warranted kind of some of the criticism that it's been getting. But what he did on Saturday was bad, and a lot of the stuff he's been throughout the season was bad. And like as far as reining it in, like he was kind of doing that at the start of the season. Like he was mostly, I think, kind of okay up until Gateway, other than a couple of isolated small incidents. But unfortunately, he's been pretty unhinged since then. And I've mentioned it before, but as much as I love Justin Marks and think he's the best owner in the sport right now, I think he's too much of a buddy, like to his drivers, right? In a sense, especially with Ross. Like I think he's not. Doesn't seem to think that there's anything wrong with what he's been doing, and that he doesn't really need to change anything. And to an extent, I guess you could say he's right. But this can't go on, for much longer. And as far as his driving style goes, like I know why people can dislike him and take the driving style anytime somebody runs over another guy. It's not kosher. It's not a good thing. But I can forgive it with him more than I can other guys myself, just because with most of the time with him, I don't feel like there's malice, like he's doing screw this guy, I'm just going to take him out. A lot of times, like I'm kind of different than like some of the other guys here, and I guess a lot of other people in general these days, where they seem to be like almost more okay with something if it's intentional or blatant. Like I still kind of think that it's worse to do something blatantly than it is just to drive a little bit too hard sometimes and cause issues. And also, again, I know that something that just peeves me a lot, and it's not just with racing and sports, but just life in general. I get so sick of people that make hypocrites out of themselves, and they seem to have no self-awareness whatsoever. And I can at least say with Ross that as dumb as he can drive sometimes, he is self-aware enough to recognize it, and he's not a hypocrite. He didn't complain when Denny took him out. When I could tell 90% of the guys in the field, let's be honest, would have pitched a big fit if they'd been on the other end of what Denny happened. But he just kind of said that, well, I was owed one and probably are owed more. And I know that in a way, it makes it even worse that he is aware of it and keeps doing it. Like, I'm rationally cognizant of that. But it's just kind of innate in me to, be more forgiving of that. And I'm too forgiving of that, and I'll admit that's kind of maybe you could say a shortcoming of mine. But that's just my take on it. But don't misconstrue it. There's no excuse for a lot of the things he does, and he has to change it. Like, he cannot keep going like this. Like, he has been out of control the last 2 months. If he can kind of return to where he was early this season, then, he will probably be fine. But, whether it's something happening to him or he's got to make a course correction. But I'm just going to be honest, I don't foresee that happening because, he had a lot of incidents in the Xfinity Series, through the years. He had a lot of run-ins. I didn't follow the Xfinity Series that much until the last 2 or 3 years. But I know he had a lot of run-ins there, and he's had all the run-ins he's had in the Cup Series. And, even if this is only his first season in premium Cup equipment, he has been in Cup for a long time. He's been in NASCAR for over a decade, and he's going to be 30 years old in December. If he hasn't changed by now, he's not really going to. And I think that's a shame because he's really fun to watch, and I appreciate his personality and his story. But, I'm at this point, I'm just wishing that my other guys would do something so I don't have to focus so much on him. And that's my take on it.
I definitely agree that it's, I respect that Ross, he always owns it, even if he keeps making the same mistake every week. He's a human being, and human beings make mistakes. And obviously at some point it gets to be shallow and hollow, and you can't take anything he says seriously. But, at least, like you said, if it's most other guys, the guy who he's been having the most notable issue with, for starters. If somebody gives him a taste of his own medicine, he just goes completely apeshit and will usually threaten them or choke them in the hauler after the race or try to ruin their burnout or whatever insecure little bitch type of thing he wants to do.
Let's not forget. Harvick last year, who threw a hissy fit over Chase Elliott just existing at Bristol, and then making a total ass of himself over it, acting like a child, and then shitting himself while Chase was in his mirrors at Roval. So, which never gets old, but yeah.
And those two.
And there's another one.
Yeah,
they're just.
They are the two guys.
Brad.
It's not surprising.
From my end, Loudon this year.
It's not surprising that it's those two, because I was going to say this last week, but because of the technical difficulties, I never got to. It's not really surprising that it's those two guys, because they are like the last remaining holdovers of like star drivers from the snowflake era of NASCAR, where Sean's like he would never use that term, of course, but like Sean has said it before. He's brought up the point that these guys that grew up or came up in the sport during the period when NASCAR was really hot shit, from the late 90s all the way to the late 2000s, basically, they all have had these huge egos and think that they can do no wrong and that only they can do right and that they own the garage and the racetrack because they were treated like gods from basically the time that they were running in go-karts. And being on private planes as teenagers, and getting all these rides and all these sponsorship deals. And so there's an entitlement that they have that really, for the most part, I mean, there's a couple of exceptions like, Noah Braxton and maybe a couple others, but for the most part, like these guys, they might screw up, and do some things wrong sometimes, but generally they have some respect and some etiquette when they do something. And, it's just really rich when these older guys, especially like Denny, try to do something. For another thing, I won't go on too long about this because, we've spent enough time on it. But generally in NASCAR history, at the end of the day, when an older guy tries to, teach the younger guy, some up-and-comer a lesson, it typically doesn't end well for the older guy. Like, we have countless examples of that, like Rusty Wallace and Jeff Gordon in 1998. I think, last year, obviously, with Kevin and Chase. There's a couple other ones, I'm sure, that I just can't remember.
Harvick did it again just yesterday with Bowman.
Oh, yeah. That he retaliated against the wrong guy. But that's a whole other story. That
Retaliated against him and totaled his own car in the process.
Yeah, that was classic. Don't have enough time to go into it, but it was classic. But there's countless examples of that, and I see it pretty much ending the same way for Denny as it has for the other guys. But anyways, we belabored that point enough, so I guess say what you're going to, and then we'll go on to the next thing.
You kind of touched on it, but what always gets me is, and Brad especially will do this, is play the whole sort of, I made it the hard way, you have to respect me because I made it the hard way sort of card, which Ross never does that. He obviously he'll play up the whole watermelon thing and all that, but he doesn't act like it entitles him to be some sort of superior figure in the garage area who everybody should bow down to, just because whatever he had to start out small. All that. So, yeah, definitely. It's always rich when Hamlin or Harvick or Brad will go on about how the young drivers have no respect and try to be this great enforcer when, in truth, all these guys who came up in the whole, I guess, after the dead generation, 2014 really started that, the Larson and then post-Larson drivers, they all generally are a lot more respectful and a lot more just humble, I guess, is the best word for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think about that. It's Hamlin, Harvick. I mean, Brad's I mean, I think of 2014 in general, Brad was, I remember at least 2 different interviews where he would use the humble card or the humble beginnings card, at the whole Chase incidents, and then Jeff Gordon at Texas. And then I guess he thinks then he's the king of the world at that point. You saw that 2016, 2017, 2018, with the whole blocking stuff and, under Wreck Byron, Daytona of all places, and then whining about not lifting and then getting wrecked the next day because somebody else did lift. It's another example of it not ending well. Obviously.
For reference, we've referenced a few times a certain member of our server who despises Brad. You're talking to him right now. So
well, I mean, hey, he was my most disliked driver like 5 years ago, but I can't really hate a guy too much that's totally irrelevant now. Like he's just not, But I remember that. It's bad when you actually had 2 guys that tried to physically assault you. Within a 10 race span. Jeff Gordon actually did. He actually did assault.
He did.
Brad.
The picture guy, he did blood on his face. Kenseth did too. I mean, he threw him against the hauler. There was almost 3. And the one to beat him up too.
That was legendary. Matt Kenseth is really. I look at the antithesis of wannabe enforcer type. Matt Kenseth was, in my opinion, the most underrated personality that this sport has had in the last. However long I've been watching it, he would usually just mind his own business. He would, he had this real great, dry, deadpan sense of humor, charm. But you did not want to fuck around with him, and he would put you in your place if you did. And I don't exactly condone some of the stuff he did. I don't condone wrecking Joey Logano at full speed while multiple laps down, but he was never, there was a difference between what he would do and these, grouchy old men who just would whine about every young driver. But anyway, we can.
Yeah, see, guys like him. See, that's another thing. I just one other point. I know we keep going on and on about this, but one last point I wanted to bring up is now I know there's a lot of people who are going to laugh at what I'm about to say with one of the people I'm mentioning, but I mean it truly. I'm not saying that being violence is a good thing or a good answer, but see, guys like Jeff Gordon and Matt Kenseth, they didn't talk a big game and then try to play toy soldier with their car and act like they were tough men and retaliate in some wussified way. This jilted ex-lover shit that a lot of these guys like Denny does. They actually went like men and they fought Brad. They fought him. They tried to kick his ass to teach him a lesson. And, these guys like Denny and Harvick, they won't do it. They won't do it, and especially Denny. I think in his case, I think he realizes, if he actually tried to fight Ross would kill him, those big watermelon working hands of his. But, that's another difference, with guys. I know that they were from the older generation, but guys like Kenseth and Gordon, if you don't give them the reason to screw with you, they won't. But if you do, and you just keep pushing them, there's going to be real consequences, and they're going to have a good way of doing it. They're going to handle it like men, and you're not going to have this pathetic little, pillow fighting crap that these guys pull. So, but we went on about this long enough, so it's probably time
what
to
I
move
wanted
on.
to talk about was Tyler Reddick. We barely even mentioned him, and he won the race yesterday. I know he is Jack's favorite driver, if I'm not mistaken.
You're correct on that.
He's Herbst's favorite driver.
Yeah, I guess along with Bowman, maybe he's kind of it, and maybe Blaney. He's like the guy who everyone just sort of likes. Just talk about. This whole situation he's had with RCR. It was announced he's going to be back there next year. It's been they're not on the best of terms right now, and yet he's still, I would say at this point now with 2 wins and all other dominant performances, I think it would not be criminal if he ends up in the Final Four at Phoenix. Probably not the most deserving champion this year, but he's also really, really overachieving in cars that I think are even worse than they usually are, because Austin Dillon is pretty average, maybe slightly above average most of the time driver, and he has been well below average this year in my metrics. So I think can absolutely make a case that Reddick has been in that elite group of drivers this year, even if Chase is kind of in a tier of his own at this point.
I would absolutely say that. You look at, Childress in general in the past, really since Harvick left, they've not been really. I guess they're a semi-competitive team, but I would not call them a super competitive team by any stretch of the means. They'll win a plate race every now and then, or have a Newman win it. We have some lucky strategy, hold up the field for 2 laps. Really, up until this year, you've not seen Childress' car win races on merit like that since Harvick. To do it twice, both of which are in pretty dominated fashion. It's pretty clear they're the best car. I think that tells a lot about Reddick as a driver. I just can't tell with RCR just because of Austin Dillon, not really doing anything. But yeah, you look at yesterday. It's another example where Reddick didn't have. He was always leading the entire race. He had strategies going on. He had to still work his way up to the front, avoid all these chaotic wrecks in that first turn. Or just in general, people dive bombing and going 6 or 7 wide, literally going to that first turn to get through that. To win at the road course like that, but win on by having the best car, I think was even more impressive. I think that race needs to be a free for all. But for me personally, just being able to see him win at Indy, a place I've pretty much lived for the last 4 years and have been to that track probably dozens of times. That was pretty cool to see, even if I wasn't there for it. He had one of the most impressive race sets that I've seen this year so far. Just being able to avoid all the calamity, all the things that happened, come out on top pretty easily, including the whole thing with Chastain at the end there, which I was half expecting Chastain to spin him out at the end there. I was fully expecting Chastain to dump him.
It definitely brought back some Robbie Gordon 2007 Montreal vibes, or I guess even Briscoe last year. Felt like Ross is. Let's just hope he doesn't do anything stupid here. I think for Reddick, though, what says a lot to me is that the tracks he's been having his best races on, the road courses, Bristol and the dirt, those have been the driver's tracks, even though the Gen 7 has equalized a lot of that, not made it virtually impossible to run up front with a B-tier car. Right. He also, he dominated Fontana in intermediate before he blew a tire. But it says a lot that, he is winning and leading at these tracks where equipment makes the smallest difference.
Yeah. I don't have really a ton to say about him to really add from what you guys said, but he's absolutely a top 5 talent in the sport right now. He is going to be a perennial championship contender when he finally makes it to 23XI racing 2 years from now. He's proving right now that he can be, by the end of the season, he could make a case for a top 5 driver even in his equipment this season. It's sad, what's going on with this kind of bitchy, petty act that Richard Childress is putting on with him right now, like where he's hem-hawing and he's saying not giving a clear answer on whether he's going to drive the car next year or whatever and all that. Just being a numbnut like he's always been. That's why he's never been a good car owner. He's just happened to have 2 really, really great drivers that have elevated the equipment, but that's.
I think before too long we're going to be putting Tyler Reddick. Maybe not that tier, but I think he's a future champion.
Yeah, I think he has potential too. I think at 23-11, I wouldn't be surprised if, there's a lot of rides that could open up, change. I wouldn't be surprised if we eventually see him in an actual Gibbs car, whether that's the 18, the 11. Because, Ty Gibbs will come in, but, Kyle Busch, Hamlin, Truex are going to retire at some point. Someone's got to fill those rides. Kurt's going to retire. I think Bubba could come over, too. I think eventually we'll see Reddick in an actual Gibbs car.
Guess
Just in no way.
I feel pretty confident in saying that outside of Earnhardt and Harvick, he is the best driver RCR has ever had, which I guess is just saying he's better than Clint Boyer, Jeff Burton. Both those guys were 10th place drivers, maybe. Burton.
Yeah, 2008 they had.
Burton's whole RCR career was just stroking and consistency, and he did have that late 90s stretch where he contending for titles, but I think I've said this before that was a very weak era for NASCAR.
His 2006
Jeff Gordon, Mark Martin, and nobody.
His 2006 was pretty good, even though he only had one win. But the rest of it was pretty much just like your Clint Boyer, later career Terry Labonte kind of stuff.
Weird, yeah.
But as far as Reddick goes, he's a supreme talent that I think I don't want to say champion because this championship system is not really about who's the best and it's a crapshoot. But I'm looking forward to having him contending as well. I see him the future pretty much is I think going to be between him, Elliott, Larson. Let's see who else. Him, maybe Ross, and maybe unfortunately Ty Gibbs. But we've still got time to wait on that at least. But
that's solid.
Yeah, we haven't
I think,
said a whole lot.
Something Jake just mentioned. Reddick right now is 8th in ETDR over the whole season, but he is only 7 points behind 4th, which is Kyle Busch right now. He could absolutely form his way into that top 5, maybe even top 3 range. It is still pretty close at the top. Paces ahead by a decent amount over Blaney and Ross, but then it's just a giant sort of jumble of everybody from 4th all the way back to about 13th.
I think with these plate races coming up, I think Reddick does have the potential to at least make some noise to get a good finish there. I don't necessarily win, but I've seen in the past that he has been competitive on these plate tracks, and he's been a contender up until the end. So he gets taken out of people's wrecks. He did cause a couple wrecks, 2020 and stuff, but those players are free for all. But you got the Glen coming up, and the Roval in the playoffs. So there's gonna be 2 tracks. I think he'll be. These road courses are 2 tracks that he's gonna be very much contender at. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if those are Chase v. Reddick shows. Which,
I think even as a Chase fan, I think it's a good thing for the sport that it seems like his advantage on road courses has kind of been neutralized a little bit. He's still probably the best road course racer in the field.
I would say so.
But it's not like he's leaps and bounds above everybody like he was a couple of years ago. And, other guys can win these races now. And, I guess part of why I feel that way is I just don't want people saying, oh, Chase can only win on road courses. But it's just good for the sport. It's some of those Watkins Glen wins that he had and some of those Daytona Roval wins. It was just like it was like Larry Bird at that one 3-point shooting contest. Who's going to come in second?
Yeah, because he just knew. Usually it was true. I remember those 2. I think it was 2018, 2019. It was literally Elliott versus Truex both those years, and I think that was the top 2 in both of those races. I remember that. I don't think Truex at the Roval has been since 2018 has been kind of invisible there. I feel like for the most part.
I think Gibbs just isn't, for whatever reason, good on road courses this year.
This year they're not. Yeah,
was fine on them up until that.
Bell, I guess, I feel like Bell, I think ever was, had a decent race somewhere. Kyle Busch probably got finished 3rd at Coda before he spun out twice in the final lap and finished 30th. Those are really only decent runs. I guess maybe Truex maybe got top 10 at Road America. I don't know. But for the most part, they've been invisible.
On that note, though, I think as great as having this much schedule diversity is, I also know it's weird. Adam has mentioned this a couple of the times that he's been on. It's like I find myself weirdly looking forward to intermediate races now all of a sudden because there's a lot less of them, and you have even less regular intermediate races now with Atlanta basically being a pseudo plate track.
Yeah.
And also with my analytics, I think puts out fairer results because I've harped on it about the road courses. Past differentials get all fucked up.
Intermediates have pretty much usually the most chalk results.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Michigan next week, I think. Not really sure what to expect because I guess the best comparison we have for it is Fontana, which was kind of everybody's still getting used to this new car sort of deal. So I don't think we'll be seeing Eric Jones and Tyler Reddick dominate the whole race.
I think we'll see some interesting faces up there.
It could definitely be interesting. And in fact, I'm just going to make my prediction. I think, I just said I don't think he's going to, dominate or be a top 2 or 3 car on speed like he was at Fontana. This has always been a good track for Eric Jones. If I'm, remembering correctly, just from some of his runs at Gibbs, and I feel like, I don't know, if things kind of get crazy toward the end, he really needs a win to make the playoffs. I just, for whatever reason, have a gut feeling that this is Eric Jones' week.
Yeah, I think in this race, and I think of last year even, the end was pretty much a free-for-all. Some of these intermediates, Charlotte, they could still come down to kind of a chaotic ending. And I think if you're in the right place with a late race caution comes out or something like that, you're 15 to go, and you're top 5, even like 7th or 8th, you have a chance to win. And I think there'll be a lot of guys that are currently on the outside looking in terms of the chase. I think Jones will be one of them. Dillon's historically been randomly good at Michigan. Last year he had probably a top 5 run going until Brad decided he wanted to take him out at 200 miles per hour straight away. But 2016 is a good run. There's a bunch of good races he's had there. He'll be a contender.
That's probably his best track. Either that or Richmond. It's like, for whatever reason, he just always runs really well at Michigan.
So I think he'll be up there, and I think it'll be a mix of your kind of regulars like Chase, Chastain, maybe Kyle Busch versus, Jones, Dillon, and maybe another guy that we just aren't even really thinking of. Busher, maybe. I can see Busher having
being a really solid Suarez race. He was strong at Fontana, too.
Yeah, I think he won a couple Michigan races, at least in the Xfinity, if I remember correctly.
He had
Suarez be a contender. Oh, that's right. He won the.
He beat Kyle Busch straight up in one of
those. So. And Kyle Busch threw a tantrum after it. I remember that. Even though it was his teammate, technically. But, I think Suarez will be a threat. I think Jones and Dillon will be those two kind of outside looking in guys will be right up there. I wouldn't be surprised if Custer was solid. For sure, I think he'll have a solid run. So there'll be definitely a lot of guys that are hungry for a win that'll be up there. And it'll be interesting to see what they do. Whether it's with strategy, if there's late race caution, the last stop, they take 2 tires, try to go for the win, or if there's a late, somebody spins out or wrecks, and then it's we're going 4 wide into turn 1, with guys trying to take the lead to have a win this year. So it's gonna be interesting, and I think it'll be a 200-lap race. I think it'll be a pretty good race from start to finish. I'm looking forward to it.
You, Jake?
Yeah. Well, I'll just first off, I'll say on the tracks thing, like we mentioned, we didn't really say anything specifically about the race in general at Indy, but I think we pretty much said all that needed to be covered. It was a race. It looked better than I probably really was because the TV was actually pleasantly covering a lot of action back in the pack that they don't seem to normally do that much anymore. Even though there wasn't a ton of battling up front. And other than the incidents, it was pretty much a ho-hum race up front until the Bell tire thing happened. And then it got pretty crazy. But Tyler Reddick survived and got a well-earned victory. And it wasn't a bad race. It was definitely, in my opinion, better than Road America or Sonoma was. But the turn one, the turn one thing is just not like we didn't mention, of course, but there was the really bad incident with Kyle Larson where I think he had brake fade, and like if Ty Dillon had not been there as kind of like a bank for him, that would have been. It was bad enough of an incident as it was, but that could have been really, really ugly. Like it's a safety hazard. It's pretty much impossible to have like a double file restart there without having some kind of calamity with these cars.
Yeah.
So
it's another solution I think they could have is just single file restarts there, or just on all the vehicles, really.
Yeah, but in any case, if they're planning on coming back to that next year, which last I heard they are, they need to do something about that, or either just go off of that track, or go to the oval, or my preferred solution is ditch it. I just wanted to say, I've heard a lot of people talking, like the drivers and the teams, people in the sport and fans saying that clamoring to go back to the oval, go back to the big track in Indy. And I'm like, I don't necessarily think it would be, that much worse of a race to go there, and there would probably be less, calamity. But I'm like, 2 years ago, you people hated this track. They said this track sucked, which it pretty much did. That's what I thought too. And now it's just like with the 750 package versus the 550 and all this other stuff. Like, why do we want to go back so quickly to something that sucked, that you didn't even like to begin with? And I'm like, I understand. Like, if you're going to go to Indy, the argument being that we should just have it on the big track because that's what we're here at Indy for, is the history and the tradition of it. Then I get it. But personally, I'm just for ditching Indy altogether because the only great NASCAR race they ever had there was the first one. At best, it had just been okay after that, and it's been mostly putrid in the 21st century. I'm for just ditching it and going to like Chicagoland or Iowa or some other track. I mean, almost anything really, to me, would be an improvement over it. I don't get this
kind of... It's been basically... This whole past decade, I guess, has been just like Weekend at Bernie's, This whole Indy experiment, it's dead. They just haven't taken it off life support.
Yeah. Like, I don't understand. Yeah, I'm just saying, I don't understand, like, the simping for, something that wasn't any good. But that being said, like, this intermediate thing, like we were talking about in general, I agree with that. Like, this is the most that I've looked forward to intermediate races in a long time, because this is the first time that they've been really good in a long time, in a genuine way. Like, I was a rare kind of person that liked the 550 package, but I can also admit that, it was pretty cheesy and kind of artificial in the way it had things. But now we're having naturally great intermediate races in a way that we hadn't had in well over a decade. But at the same time, I'm not really on this kind of bandwagon that a lot of people are on right now of like saying, well, we need to go back to having a bunch of intermediates in the schedule now, which once again, was people used to complain about how many intermediates we had on the schedule, 10, 15 years ago when they sucked. And now they're saying because the racing has been good, well, let's start having a bunch of them again. And I'm like, I'm fine with the amount we have right now. I don't think it needs to be any less. I don't think it needs to be any more, because the law of averages and history and common sense will tell you that, I'm sure with this car that the racing can still be good, as time goes on with this car and some of the less like dependence on aero and engineering. But at some point, it is going to regress somewhat and is not going to be as good as it's been this season. But by the same token, the racing on the smaller tracks is not going to stay this bad. Like, for instance, there's nowhere to really go but up for like the racing at Martinsville right now. And the same goes for Phoenix and, a bunch of other tracks that are on the schedule right now. So, I'm kind of just like, like imploring to people to just kind of slow their roll on that. Like, I understand the emotions behind it, and the excitement, and I'm glad that we can have that kind of enthusiasm and excitement around these races. But, we need to kind of look at this and not just trash places that have been good in the past just because they're down right now and vice versa. But anyways, that's just kind of like the last monologue I wanted to give on that. As far as the Michigan race goes, I think it'll be okay. I don't expect it to be great, but I don't expect it to be bad either. I actually thought the Michigan race last year and all the 550 races were not bad at all. And I thought that last year was the best out of all of them. I thought that package actually worked really well with the racetrack. But hopefully, again, this will be better, like in a more natural way, which we need, because this track, after it was repaved in 2012, was pretty putrid for a while. And that's why it's only got one date at this point. But I think it'll be okay. And as far as who I picked to win, I can't give you a definite answer, but my gut's kind of saying that Ryan Blaney will repeat. But again, I can't base that off of a lot of logic. That's just kind of my instinct at this point. So you got, before I go off on my last little thing about F1, do you guys have anything else to add?
I was just going to say, you kind of reminded me of something by mentioning the Larson wreck yesterday. I think the most dangerous thing I saw was, and I was going to have a short little rant about this that I seem to do every other week, but Chris Buescher, who was literally trapped in his car while it was on fire and smoking because of this stupid fucking crash clock. And if he had gotten out of his car, it would have ended his race. So instead, he had to stay in a burning car while they fixed it. And miraculously, they actually were able to fix it. He got a top 10 finish because of all the calamity at the end. So yeah, that's just my quick little, I guess, weekly crash clock is stupid and bad rant. It could have seriously endangered Buescher, and it caused Byron to DNF for seems like the third or fourth time this year that he's had minimal damage in an incident. Yeah, that's all.
I get no opposition from me on that. That was the latest and most egregious example of the crash clock rearing its ugly head, because if you're trying to make the argument that it's a safety rule, which it's pretty much designed to be, then that's literally the exact opposite of it. And so, anybody that is defending it after this, they either, have their head so far up NASCAR's ass that they can't see anything, or they just are really dumb,
Yeah. Agree.
All right, I guess say your whole F1 spiel, because I am just not an F1 person, so I won't have anything to say.
And I'm gonna assume that you haven't seen it, didn't see it, Jimmy, or
I did not.
Yeah, okay. It was actually
I have the channel muted, so I don't know what is even going on.
I'll just say the Hungarian Grand Prix that we had yesterday was actually pretty good. It was one of the best races of the season, and it was the first race where we really had three teams, even if they were the expected three teams, competing at once, really in the mix for the win. And, it's not often in F1 that you get to see six cars basically stay within 10 seconds of each other throughout the whole race, when there aren't even safety cars. And so that really tells you how quality was. And even though, the Hungaroring has been kind of maligned, maybe rightly so, for being a track where it's very difficult to pass and you can't necessarily have a lot of action, it produced a very good race yesterday, and it was pretty entertaining. And first off, feelings aside, I'm no Lewis Hamilton fan. Anybody that really knows me knows that I don't. I'm not a stan of his or anything, but I have to give credit where it's due. That's one of the best races that he's driven this season. That was an impressive run on his soft tires that he had at the end. If it had been a few more laps, he probably could have challenged Max for the victory. George Russell had a great weekend. He got a bit unlucky in the race to get caught out on strategy, or at least get the short end of the stick on that. But he laid down an unbelievable qualifying lap to get the pole. He had very good race pace. led a good portion of the race and held the Red Bull guys, or not, the Ferraris back for a good period of time before finally the speed was just too much. And then, I won't say a lot about Ferrari because anybody that's watched the races knows, even has a cursory knowledge of F1 from watching it last decade, know that even if they have fast cars like they've had this year, they are clowns that they could make 23XI in NASCAR blush with their strategy and pit performance. They just completely botched the race yesterday with Charles Leclerc. Another race where he could have gained on Max, he ended up losing a bunch to him. The championship's basically all but over at this point with 10 races left, largely because of their screw-ups. And then Max, of course, himself, this already feels like the most underrated win of his career because, he came from 10th on the grid after an electronic problem in qualifying to win by 8 seconds with no safety cars, no restarts to punch up the field, while also having a spin mid-race. And he did all that, to win the race. And comparing it, it should get more credit because last year when Lewis Hamilton came from 10th to win at Brazil with that overpowered, machine that he had, on a much easier track to pass, Brazil, everyone just salivated over it. And Max does something way more impressive than that, even though it was in the fastest car, I'll admit. It's no big deal, but hey, them's the breaks. I don't think he really cares too much right now with his, I think, 80-plus point lead, a race and a half worth in the championship. He looks like he's about to Gordon 1998, everybody. So, congrats to him. And did we have, even if we did, we're not really going to talk about it because we spent long enough. But there wasn't an Indy race Indy car race this week, or was there?
Yeah, there was.
There was the road course.
GP, they were at Indy.
Well, if you want to say anything, you can.
Rossi won for the first time in 3 years. I think last time he'd won was literally same week that our server was formed.
I was actually wondering
I just wanted to say really, really quickly about IndyCar. I hope Marcus Ericsson doesn't win the title because he has been the IndyCar version this year of whatever you name it, stroker, just consistency robot. NASCAR, he led 40 laps all season. No, it's like
a better Eric Almirola.
It's like Ryan Newman in 2014. Never led.
The win.
Constantly finished towards the front every week. IndyCar has a lot less drivers, I guess, so it's easier to get top fives. Top five in IndyCar is like a top 10 in NASCAR. So, yeah, I hope either Newgarden is able to miraculously bounce back from his injury and whatever happened to him, or Pato O'Ward can make a run. I'd be fine with Will Power, though, too. Just even if he's having a bit of an overrated season himself, I think probably deserves multiple titles for his career. So that's just all I'll say on that, I guess.
Yeah, I agree with that. Power's a solid year. Newgarden, we'll see. Dixon, I think, is a little too far back. You never know. I think he probably should have won the 500.
That's the other thing.
He was in position to win
500 is
I think he literally had that race won. If he had just not spent pits on his last stop, he'd probably be the points leader right now, or at the very least second. Ericsson's maybe top 5, probably lower, which would be something to note on. But yeah, I think about that. And Dixon's still in it. He's probably need to have a couple wins here, at the very least. Podiums every week almost. But it's starting to look like the difference for him between possible title and what could be a third or fourth place points finish now. So, more to that, I guess. Looking back at it, Dixon. So,
Right. Was there anything else we were going to cover?
Not that I know of. Unless Jimmy wanted to add something himself, I don't think so.
I think we covered it.
Yep.
Enjoyed being here today. So,
Yeah, it was great to actually be able to have an episode this week.
Yeah.
And we'll just kind of take this 1 week at a time moving forward. We might not have episodes every week. Might have kind of rotating people on here. I know Adam said he was just stepping out for a couple of weeks because his work schedule was too busy, but he'll be back at some point. We might have Merb or Alex back at some point. And we'll just continue to try to have different people at various times, and keep doing this thing at least every couple weeks or so.
Yeah, and we'll play it by ear on that. Yeah, but for you people listening, I'm not making any more promises because that has not worked out well for us the last couple of weeks. Like, we make a promise and then we have to break it and have to apologize, and half the messages or more for the last month we've had have been apologies. So I'm not even going to make promises. We're just going to see what happens. But yeah, we enjoyed having you on today, Jimmy. We'll definitely have you on again at some point. I don't know where exactly in the rotation you'll be, but we will have you again.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Sounds good. I am looking forward to it.
I think.
So.
Well, that does it for this show, I guess. Thanks to my associates and our guest for being on here today. The TRC podcast is Ryan, our head analyst and statistician. Me, Jake, our host and kind of like semi-wannabe co-analyst, non-statistician, like emotionality guy, whatever you want to call it, and the tech person. And with us today, again, was our guest, Jimmy Fan 48, a good personal friend of Ryan's. Thank them for being on the show. Thank all of you for listening, and we'll see you next time.